It all started the morning I caught a tow truck creeping up my driveway. I was in my kitchen sipping burnt coffee when I saw the rusted yellow rig idling behind my barn near the back fence. The driver was on his phone, looking confused, probably because the abandoned structure he was sent to assess was a fully functional, freshly painted red barn with aluminum siding and a concrete foundation. I stepped out barefoot onto the porch and yelled, "You lost or just trespassing?" He peeled off without a word, but I knew exactly who sent him. Barbara Delling, HOA president of the Timberstone Ridge Neighborhood Association, and a menace in yoga pants. She had a voice like an emergency siren and a permanent scowl that made you think she smelled something foul every time she looked at you, which she often did. My name's Gavin Prescott. I'm 51, own a small landscaping business, and I've lived on the edge of Timberstone Ridge for 7 years. Technically, I'm just outside the HOA's jurisdiction. My lot was grandfathered in, part of the original farmland before the developers swarmed in with their cookie-cutter homes and plastic smiles. But that never stopped Barbara from acting like she ran the whole zip code. The barn in question, built by my grandfather in the 60s, reinforced by me and my buddy Carter last spring to store my work equipment. Zoning checked out, permits all clean. Still, Barbara decided it was a visual blight and structural hazard. And now, apparently, she tried to have it condemned. I wasn't about to let that slide. That evening, I called my old friend Grady Pelton. Grady's a contractor, big guy, beard like a bear's, voice like gravel, and the patience of a cactus. We met back in the 90s when I was doing landscaping on his first build. He owed me a favor or two. I told him what happened, and he laughed so hard I thought he'd bust a lung. "She tried to demolish your barn?" he wheezed. "That's rich." "No, she threatened to demolish it. Then she sent some poor tow truck guy to scope it out, probably trying to document it for a fake citation. And she's HOA? President. Self-appointed queen of Timberstone." Grady got quiet for a second, then his tone shifted. "You know, I've worked on a few houses in that neighborhood. Want to have some fun." That's how the idea started. Next day, I walked into the Timberstone HOA office, which was really just a converted bedroom in Barbara's oversized stucco McMansion, and asked for a copy of their bylaws. "Why?" She squinted at me from over her reading glasses. "You're not under HOA jurisdiction. We've told you this before." "Oh, just curious," I said innocently. "Want to make sure I'm not accidentally violating any visual standards with my fully permitted barn." She sniffed. "That rotting shack? It's an eyesore. We've had complaints." "From who?" "Concerned residents." "Names?" "That's confidential." "Then I guess we're done here." I grabbed the bylaws pamphlet and walked out before she could say another word. That night, Grady and I went through the HOA guidelines like we were prepping for a lawsuit. Turns out, Barbara had a habit of bending the rules for her friends and tightening them like a vice on everyone else. We found at least a dozen violations in the neighborhood: unapproved additions, mismatched paint jobs, illegal fencing, non-permitted driveways. And the kicker? Barbara's own house had an unpermitted sunroom extension that jutted over the property line. Grady grinned. "You ready?" He showed up 2 days later with high-visibility vests, clipboards, and some official-looking decals that said Pending Demolition Review, County Compliance Division. We weren't breaking any laws, just walking around the neighborhood taking notes, using public info, and marking structures we suspected were in violation. First up, Barbara's house. We slapped one of the decals on her sunroom window, then moved on to her friend Marcia's place. Her deck was a foot too tall. Then Cameron's garage extension. One by one, we inspected these homes, making sure to do it when folks were watching. By the fourth house, people were coming out of their doors asking what was going on. "County Compliance Review," Grady said in his gravelly voice. "Standard inspections. We'll be filing reports this week." Barbara came storming down the street in her tennis outfit, red in the face. "You can't do this," she barked. "This is private property." Grady didn't flinch. "Ma'am, your sunroom is extending over your property line by 36 inches. That's a code violation and subject to removal under state ordinance. That's absurd. You're not even with the county." "No, ma'am," he said, flipping the clipboard around to show his business card. "We're private contractors hired to assess potential code violations for a pending civil review. All findings will be submitted to the county office for verification," which was technically true. Grady was submitting a report to the county. And since Timberstone was under city jurisdiction, Any code violations, especially involving unpermitted structures, could trigger real inspections. Barbara's face twisted like she'd bitten into a lemon. I'll call the sheriff. Please do, I said, stepping up beside Grady. They'll be interested to hear you tried to have a permitted barn demolished on land outside your jurisdiction. That's attempted property interference. She didn't call. Instead, she stormed off, muttering something about lawyers. The next day, 3 houses in Timberstone had contractors ripping off sunrooms and repainting fences. Barbara's wasn't one of them. She was still clinging to the illusion of power. But the cracks were showing. That weekend, I got an envelope taped to my fence. Inside was a letter on official HOA letterhead complete with Barbara's signature ordering me to cease and desist all construction and property alterations immediately. It also threatened fines of up to $10,000. I took it straight to the sheriff's office. Deputy Cardenas looked it over, frowned, then called in the city's zoning department. 36 hours later, the county sent an inspector to Barbara's house. They found 6 unpermitted modifications, 3 code violations, and a forged compliance document filed under her name. And that was just the beginning. On Monday morning, I was unloading mulch bags from my trailer when a silver Mercedes slid to a stop in front of my driveway. The window rolled down, and out leaned a man in a navy blazer with sunglasses perched too neatly on his nose. You Gavin Prescott? He asked, like he already knew the answer. I nodded. I'm Charles Wexler, legal counsel for the Timberstone Ridge HOA. I need to speak with you. I wiped my hands on my jeans and leaned against the tailgate. You're a little overdressed for a neighborhood visit, Charles. He ignored the jab. I'm here regarding what you and your associate have been doing around Timberstone. You've created a panic. Homeowners are calling the board nonstop. Then maybe they should read their own bylaws before building patio palaces on top of utility easements. He took a breath through his nose. You're not authorized to conduct inspections. You're harassing residents. I pointed toward my barn. And Barbara wasn't authorized to send someone to assess my property for demolition. That's called trespassing. She misunderstood your proximity to the HOA boundary. No, she didn't. She knows exactly where her power ends. She just doesn't like it. Wexler's lips tightened. You're escalating something that could have been resolved with a civil conversation. You mean like the cease and desist letter she taped to my fence? Or the fake demolition order? You want civil, you can start with honesty. He looked over his shoulder, probably checking to see if anyone was watching, then lowered his voice. This isn't going to end well for her. Off the record, she's been warned before. But if this turns into a criminal matter, it'll drag the entire board down with her. I'm advising you to stand down and let us handle it internally. Too late for that. County's involved now. He didn't reply, just rolled up his window and drove off, tires crunching over gravel like an afterthought. That afternoon, I stopped by the zoning office to follow up. The clerk, a woman named Lacey who wore her hair in a tight bun and had a dry sense of humor, filed the inspection report without blinking. Barbara Delling, she said, flipping through the papers. This is the 3rd complaint we've had involving her in 5 years. The last one stalled because nobody wanted to testify. I'm not afraid to testify. She looked up from her screen. Good. Because we've got enough here to refer it to the city attorney. Back at home, I noticed something odd. My mailbox had been knocked loose, hanging by one screw, and the flag was snapped clean off. I checked my security feed and found the footage. A man in work boots and a hoodie, around midnight, creeping up to the post with a crowbar. He whacked the side, yanked the flag, then sprinted off toward the cul-de-sac. I took the footage straight to Deputy Cardenas, who raised an eyebrow. You think this is connected? Mailbox vandalism right after I file a zoning complaint? You tell me. He copied the footage and promised to run it through their database. Looks like someone's trying to shake you. Don't engage. Let us handle it. I didn't tell him that I'd already installed 2 more trail cams around the property. One faced the front lawn. The other, hidden in a birdhouse, caught the alley behind the barn. If they came again, I'd know. Next morning, a new player entered the scene. Her name was Janine Tolland. She was a city compliance officer with a clipboard thicker than a law textbook and a badge that gave her the authority to make grown men sweat. She arrived in a white city vehicle with magnetic seals that read municipal code enforcement. She knocked once. Mr. Prescott? I'm here about the Timberstone Ridge complaints. Come on in. You want coffee or just the horror stories? She chuckled and stepped inside. I've already had 2 cups and a headache. Let's stick with the stories. I gave her copies of everything: the cease and desist letter, the footage of the attempted mailbox sabotage, and the inspection notes from Grady's walkthrough. She leafed through every page like she was scoring a test. Your barn's not the issue here. It's the HOA's overreach. This kind of behavior, filing false claims, forging compliance documents, and attempting to intimidate a non-member, it could constitute criminal fraud. Already talked to zoning. They're escalating. Well, now so am I. I'll be speaking to the city attorney's office today. If there's a pattern of misconduct by the HOA, and it looks like there is, we can refer this to the district court. I escorted her out, and as she pulled away, Grady drove up in his flatbed. He climbed out holding a rolled-up blueprint tube. You're gonna love this, he said, slapping it against my truck bed. I pulled the original developer plat maps for Timberstone. Turns out, Barbara's lot is partially sitting on a designated utility easement. Tell me you're kidding. Nope. Her sunroom? Built right over a fiber conduit trench that was never decommissioned. If the city orders access, they'll have to tear the whole thing down. I stared at the map. How do we get that in front of the right people? You already did. Janine's taking it to the city attorney. By Friday, the neighborhood was buzzing. Word had spread beyond Barbara's circle. Residents were knocking on my door asking questions. One couple, Tom and Lila from 2 streets over, told me Barbara had fined them $500 for planting rose bushes 2 inches outside the approved flower bed zone. She said it disrupted the visual flow of the street. Tom recalled. But her front yard has plastic flamingos. Another resident, a retired Navy corpsman named Elijah, revealed that Barbara had once threatened to evict his granddaughter for parking a scooter on the sidewalk for 10 minutes. She called it a safety risk. Said it violated pedestrian access codes. The kid's scooter was pink and had a unicorn horn. I invited them all back Saturday for a community meeting. We gathered in my barn fitting, considering it was the spark that lit the fuse. Folding chairs in rows, thermoses of coffee, and Grady standing by the whiteboard with a dry erase marker like he was teaching shop class. I started with the footage. The tow truck, the mailbox vandal, the forged letter. Then I handed out copies of the HOA bylaws, highlighting every section that had been selectively enforced or outright ignored. Grady presented the plat maps, showing overlapping easements and illegal expansions. By the end, the room was dead quiet. Then Elijah stood up. She's been bullying this neighborhood for years. But if we're going to stop her, we have to do it together. Lila raised her hand. What about a recall vote? We're working on legal charges, I said. But a recall would send a message. You need 51% of the member households to sign a petition. Tom stood. I'll go door to door. By Sunday, they'd gathered over 70%. The city attorney's office confirmed they were opening a formal investigation into the HOA's leadership for fraudulent filings, violation of municipal code, and intimidation. The forged compliance document alone carried a potential felony charge. Barbara tried to hold an emergency board meeting Monday night, but only 2 members showed up. The rest had resigned. I watched from my porch as she stormed past my driveway on her morning walk, glaring at my freshly painted barn like it had personally insulted her. She didn't say a word. She didn't need to. Her sunroom now had a bright orange sticker from the city slapped across the window. Unauthorized structure under investigation. Funny thing about bullies, they act invincible until someone reads the rules out loud. And this time, the whole neighborhood was listening. On Tuesday morning, 2 unmarked sedans parked across from Barbara Delling's house and stayed there for hours. One of the neighbors, a former insurance adjuster named Rita, said the men inside wore badges on lanyards and carried recording equipment. Not local police. Not city code enforcement. Something higher. By noon, word had spread that the county's Special Investigations Unit had opened a formal case against the Timberstone Ridge HOA board. What started as zoning violations had turned into something far darker. I was in my backyard clearing brush near the fence when I heard voices coming from the alley behind Barbara's property. 2 investigators stood with a clipboard and a small device that looked like a ground-penetrating scanner. They were scanning the backyard, muttering about missing conduit markers and disturbed soil. I didn't ask questions. I just made sure my trail cams were rolling. That evening, Janine Tolland returned, this time with a different badge clipped to her jacket. She stepped out of her car with a file folder tucked under her arm and walked straight to my porch. I can't stay long, she said, but I wanted to let you know something's come up. Something serious. I motioned her to the bench swing near the window and waited. She opened the folder and tapped a page covered in grid coordinates and notes. While reviewing the HOA's permit filings, we discovered several instances of altered survey data. At first, we thought it was just sloppy paperwork, but then we cross-checked it against the city's GIS records. Turns out, Barbara and one of the former board members filed falsified plats to expand the HOA boundary lines by about 10 feet on several lots, including yours. My stomach tensed. They tried to steal land? On paper, yes. It's called adverse administrative encroachment. Illegal if done knowingly, and from the way these records are altered. They knew exactly what they were doing. I leaned forward. How far does it go? We're still combing through the data, but preliminarily, it looks like they attempted to annex nearly a full acre of land from 6 different property owners, including city-owned green space. If proven, that's not just fraud, it's felony real estate manipulation. I sat back in silence as she flipped to another page. This one showed a scanned email thread between Barbara and a private land assessor. The tone was casual, but the content wasn't. She asked this assessor to adjust lot lines in exchange for a consulting fee. The guy got nervous and reported it to the city. That's how this whole thread got flagged. I stared at the page. She tried to buy fake borders. Janine nodded. And that's only the beginning. We've got a financial audit underway now. If they used HOA dues to pay for this, it becomes embezzlement. Just then, my phone buzzed. Carter, one of my oldest friends and the guy who helped me reinforce the barn last year, had texted me to check the news. City News Channel 7 had just aired a story titled, "Local HOA Under Criminal Investigation for Land Fraud." I showed Janine the screen. She gave a tired half laugh. Well, I guess the lid's off now. The fallout came faster than anyone expected. By Wednesday morning, Barbara's house had a notice posted on the front door by the District Property Crimes Division. It was a cease and desist order, freezing all HOA activities pending investigation. The HOA website went offline. Their office phone line rang to voicemail. Residents were left with no idea who was in charge or how to reach anyone. I passed Barbara's house on my way to the hardware store and saw her pacing in her driveway, phone clutched to her ear, barking into it. Her lawn hadn't been cut, her mailbox was full, and the flamingos were gone. The Queen had lost her court. That afternoon, Grady and I met with a city mediator and a legal rep from the county. They asked us to assist with building a timeline of events, including Barbara's attempted interference with my barn and the fake demolition efforts. We laid it all out: dates, photos, diagrams, and printed emails we'd obtained through public records. The county attorney, a sharp-eyed woman named Meredith Chan, listened carefully, tapping a pen against her notepad. "This is more than mismanagement," she said. "It's a coordinated abuse of power. You've got coercion, document forgery, and now suspected financial misappropriation. If the audit confirms HOA dues were used to pay for illegal boundary filings, we'll pursue criminal charges." Grady leaned back in his chair, arms folded. "What can the residents do in the meantime?" Chan didn't hesitate. "Form a temporary neighborhood council. Elect interim spokespeople. You don't need a functioning HOA to maintain order. What you need is transparency." That night, I hosted another meeting in the barn. Not just residents this time, reporters, city officials, and 2 council members showed up. We laid out the developments, answered every question, and passed around a sign-up sheet for those interested in forming a new neighborhood advisory group. Tom volunteered to lead the effort. Lila offered to manage communications. Elijah, with his calm demeanor and decades of organized service, became the community liaison. For the first time, Timberstone Ridge wasn't being ruled, it was being run by its people. But the legal storm wasn't over. On Friday, investigators served a search warrant on Barbara's home. I watched from my porch as 2 plainclothes officers escorted her to a black SUV. She wasn't handcuffed, but the look on her face said everything. Her composure was gone. Her jaw clenched. Her eyes darted between neighbors standing silently across their driveways. She didn't scream, didn't rage, just ducked her head and got in the car. Later that evening, Deputy Cardenas stopped by my place, dressed in plain clothes and holding a sealed envelope. "Just wanted to let you know, she's been charged," he said, handing me the notice. 3 felony counts: falsifying public records, attempted property theft, and misuse of community funds. There may be more once the financial audit wraps. I didn't open the envelope. I didn't need to. "Any chance she'll do time?" Cardenas nodded slowly. If the DA pursues the maximum, and if she doesn't flip on her co-conspirators, yeah, she's looking at 5 years minimum. I thanked him, and he left with a nod. The next day, the newly formed Neighborhood Advisory Group held their first official meeting under the old oak tree near the Timberstone sign. No one wore suits. No one shouted. They discussed trash pickup schedules, lawn maintenance volunteers, and ideas for a community garden. Barbara's name didn't come up once. That evening, Grady and I sat on my porch, sipping cold drinks and watching the sun drop behind the rooftops. "You ever think it'd go this far?" he asked. I shook my head. I figured she'd push a little, maybe throw some fines around. I didn't expect full-on land fraud. He raised his glass. "Well, you played it smart. You didn't scream or throw punches. You just turned her own rules against her." I looked out at the barn still standing, still solid. Sometimes all it takes is showing people what's really going on. Once they see it, they can't unsee it. Grady chuckled. "You think she ever thought the guy with the barn would bring her whole empire down?" I didn't answer. We just sat there, listening to the neighborhood settle into something quieter, something better. And for the first time in a long time, Timberstone Ridge didn't feel like a place you had to survive. It felt like home. The morning after Barbara's arrest, the neighborhood had the hush of a place holding its breath. Gone were the clipped hedges done for show, the passive-aggressive yard signs, and the patrols of clipboard-wielding board members. The Timberstone Ridge HOA hadn't just lost its voice, it had lost its grip. And now, it was time to clean up what it left behind. I was walking the perimeter of my barn, double-checking the anchor bolts on the south wall, when Elijah walked up the drive with a folded paper in his hand. He wore a navy windbreaker and aviator sunglasses, and the angle of his jaw told me something was on his mind. "They're looking into the HOA's financials deeper than we thought," he said, handing me the paper. "You should see this." It was a copy of a city council memo. Someone had leaked it through the new advisory group. The document detailed a forensic audit started by the county's financial crimes unit. Not only had HOA funds been misappropriated for fake property filings, but there were also over 24 flagged transactions to private contractors, some of whom didn't even exist. They were paying ghost vendors, Elijah said. Tens of thousands. All rubber stamped by Barbara. I ran my thumb along the edge of the paper. That explains the sudden landscaping projects last year that no one saw happen, and the security patrols that never showed up. "They're building a fraud case that could cover almost 6 years, he said. And guess what? One of the shell companies is traced back to her cousin in Arizona. Misuse of public funds, conspiracy, and wire fraud, I said. "That's federal." He nodded. "And they're pulling in the feds now." Later that day, I got a call from Meredith Chan, the county attorney. She asked if she could stop by in person. When she arrived, she didn't come alone. A man in a gray suit with a Department of Justice badge clipped to his belt joined her. He introduced himself as Agent Reyes. "We're expanding the investigation," Meredith said, cutting straight to it. "This has moved well beyond local interference." Reyes opened a manila folder and laid out a series of printed wire transfers, each one traced from Timberstone's HOA account to a rotating set of LLCs. "We've confirmed over $100,000 in fraudulent disbursements. The board approved them under neighborhood improvement initiatives, but most of these companies don't exist." I looked closer. One of the payments was labeled Fence-Align Consulting. Another, Greenway Preservation. Both had addresses that led to empty lots. "Barbara's signature is on all of them," Reyes continued. "But we're also seeing co-signatures. At least 2 other board members were in on it. Elise and Cameron," I said instantly. "She kept them close." Reyes didn't confirm it, but the way he closed the folder said enough. "What happens next?" I asked. Meredith leaned forward. "We're convening a grand jury next week. If indictments are handed down, federal charges will follow. We're treating this as a coordinated financial crime ring under the guise of a homeowners association. You'll keep the residents in the loop?" She nodded. Through the advisory group. No more backroom decisions. By now, Timberstone's residents were no longer passive spectators. They were involved, active, and angry. Tom, who'd once hesitated to speak up, had become the main voice of the community. He organized a town hall in the park near the community center. Over 100 people came. Grady and I sat near the back under a pop-up canopy while Tom addressed the crowd from a low stage made of plywood and milk crates. "What happened wasn't just mismanagement," he said, his voice steady. "It was theft. They took our trust, our money, and tried to take our property. But that's done now. The crowd didn't cheer, they listened intently. When he invited residents to share their own stories, one by one, people took the mic. A retired schoolteacher revealed she'd been fined for having a bird bath too rustic for the aesthetic cohesion of her yard. A single father explained how Barbara had denied his request to build a wheelchair ramp for his son because it wasn't architecturally harmonious. A teenage girl spoke up, trembling, about how her older brother had been threatened with towing for parking his pickup in front of their own house overnight. Each story chipped away at the illusion of control the HOA once held. After the meeting, I caught up with Grady back at my truck. "You see the way they're looking at each other now?" I said, "Not like neighbors afraid of who's watching. Like people who've got each other's backs." Grady nodded, tapping the tailgate. "They were never weak. They were just isolated. That's what Barbara counted on." The following week, subpoenas were issued. Elise and Cameron were both named. One tried to resign quietly and leave town. The district court froze their assets within 24 hours. The city posted a formal notice dissolving the Timberstone Ridge HOA until further notice, pending reformation under new leadership. The barn, my barn, was now a symbol. Not because it stood tall or looked pretty, but because someone tried to erase it and failed. One morning I found a small wooden plaque nailed to the side, just above the latch, "Property protected by neighbors." No name, no date, just those words. I left it there. 2 weeks later, the grand jury returned 5 indictments. Barbara, Elise, Cameron, and 2 others who had served as treasurers at different times. The charges ranged from mail fraud and falsifying public records to conspiracy to commit wire fraud and unlawful property encroachment. Barbara's trial was scheduled within the year, but she'd already been denied bail after prosecutors revealed she had tried to transfer assets to an offshore account. Her attorney argued it was her retirement fund. The judge called it what it was, an escape plan. The feds seized her house. The sunroom was torn down as part of a code enforcement action. Her Mercedes was auctioned off to pay restitution. And her name? It was scrubbed from every HOA document, every city partnership file, and every community event registry. In her place, the advisory council formed a legitimate neighborhood board, transparent, volunteer-based, and legally bound. No dues without receipts. No rules without votes. They even instituted a rotating seat policy. No one could serve more than a single term without a unanimous community vote. The first order of business? Repeal every restriction made under Barbara's tenure. The second? Approve a grant to turn the empty lot beside the community center into a shared garden and workshop space. Grady helped pour the foundation for the tool shed. Elijah built the benches. I landscaped the walking paths and planted wildflowers along the edge. On opening day, the entire neighborhood came out. Kids ran between garden beds. People shared lemonade and stories. And no one mentioned the HOA, not in anger, not even in passing. As the sun dipped behind the rooftops, I stood with Grady beneath the old oak tree. The barn glowed red in the distance under string lights someone had run from a solar battery. "You think it's over?" I asked. Grady shrugged. "Power like that doesn't vanish. It waits. Might come back in a different form. But now they know how to spot it and what to do when it shows itself." I looked around, at the people laughing, at the repaired sidewalks, at the unlocked gates. I think we finally remembered what a neighborhood's supposed to feel like. He raised his drink. "To the barn." I clinked mine against his. "To the people who protected it." And just like that, the place that had once been ruled by fear became something else entirely. Free.